And we are ready to go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Good evening, everybody, and Chag Sameach. Welcome to the first night of Hanukkah here. We are kicking off our programming for Hanukkah this year. We're doing illuminating the spark each night of Hanukkah. Each night will correspond to a different Jewish value or idea. And tonight, our value is the theme of faith, emunah, a concept that is not discussed explicitly in the Torah and is somewhat an esoteric and occasionally unreachable idea for many people. But we hope that tonight our discussion will maybe help to alleviate some of those fears and maybe make the idea a little bit more accessible to people during the holiday. So I'm joined this evening by Cantor Thom King, Rabbi Ben Shalva, and Rabbi Steve Schwartz from Bethel Congregation. I, of course, am your host, Ben Kreshtool, Ritual Director from Bethel. And I want to thank everybody for joining me tonight here this evening. Very much a pleasure to have you all. So thank you for being here and for your time. And so, like I was saying, the concept of faith is like a weird kind of concept, right? The Torah itself does not explicitly say, thou shalt have faith in God, right? Thou shalt have faith, thou shalt believe, right? It doesn't say any of those things. But, you know, there are kind of consequences for sort of not having, you know, faith. You know, the incident of the spies comes to mind, you know, or, some other examples of Korach's rebellion as well. You know, these things where a punishment happens for people not having, you know, a faith in God. And it's a weird sort of thing to think about, especially for Bnei Yisrael when they witnessed miracles from God. And then they could turn around just as quickly and, you know, build a golden calf or complain or, you know, think that things in Egypt are better. And so I guess one of the first things we want to sort of talk about is, you know, how, what does faith sort of mean to you all in the context of how you see our tradition, right? We're commanded to love God, right? To love our God, but does love imply faith? Is it, you know, the same? What are your thoughts?
I had an idea about that, and that is that, you know, the word for faith, or the word faith, is something that we use differently when we talk about God than we do about anything else. If I say to Rabbi Shalva, I have faith in you, it doesn't mean that I believe that he exists. It means that I believe that he's going to do what he says he's going to do. If I have faith in someone, it means that I trust them to do what they say they're going to do. And we don't really usually think about God in that way. Some of us do. I think some people, when they pray, they say, I know that my prayers are going to be answered. And they may be answered. They may be answered in a way that we don't like. It's not quite the same idea, because as you said, Ben, I don't know if you did it on purpose or not, but faith and belief, when it comes to religion, are sort of the same thing. I mean, I believe in Ben Shalva too, but it's not that I believe he exists. I believe in him for who he is, right? But when we say we have faith in God or we believe in God, we're just saying, yes, I believe that God exists, that he is, that he's not just made up. So I think that's really one of the questions about that word faith that I think we have to grapple with.
Yeah, and you know, Ben, when you talked about how the Israelites witnessed the miracles and then they're off and running, and faith seems to leave them so quickly and so easily. One of the things that came into my mind was that faith waxes and wanes. You know, it's sometimes stronger, it's sometimes weaker. To me, that's a very authentic way of wrestling with faith. I'm always sort of slightly suspicious of a person whose faith never wavers, and you know, they never question and never doubt. I think that's very authentically Jewish, to question, to doubt, to kind of wrestle with it. I mean, we're just coming off, as we film this, we're coming off the Sedra with the famous angel wrestling scene with Jacob, and such a powerful metaphor to me about how Jews try to deal with faith in their lives. So it waxes, it wanes, it's up and down. The people see the miracle. V'aminu b'Adonai u'Moshe avdo, you know, it's like right there. They have faith in Adonai and in Moses, but then just a couple chapters down the road, they're kvetching like crazy. So it's a difficult path, I think, to walk on. I mean, certainly I could say that for myself personally. Yeah.
I really agree. I think that one of the biggest difficulties is that, as Cantor King was saying, like he can, believe in me and believe that I exist. But when we're talking about believing in God, I mean, we're talking about the invisible, the ineffable. Like there's very few things that we're asked to believe in that we can't see and feel and touch. For me, one of the moments that's so powerful in the Torah is when Moses is standing before the burning bush and asks God, who is this God who's calling me to go to Egypt? And God says, my name is Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, which just means I will be what I will be. So God basically is saying, it's a name that's not a name. It's a presence that's always uncertain and evolving. So to be certain about uncertainty is really challenging.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I agree, and especially with what Rabbi Schwartz was saying about, people who don't struggle with faith, that seem to have that always unshakable faith is definitely suspicious. I know also for me personally, is something that I struggle with from time to time. I love to pray and it's very important to me, but every now and then, you think about, the world we live in and some of the things going on, and you have to wonder, what, and it's hard. It's hard. Okay, so I have a comment here. We're going to do some editing as well. So I'm going to ask you now each a question, and I want you each to answer it one by one. All right, so here, Cantor King, we'll start with you. The question, and it's the same question for all of them. So we'll start with Cantor King, and I guess I want to know, when is it that you became aware of sort of your own personal faith?
I really believe that I've always had it. I think that I came from a family that practiced religion very, very regularly and very strongly. It was an important part of their life. And I always had a faith in God. It was a faith that God existed. And I don't think I ever really lost it, because the only reason I didn't is because I don't think I ever thought that I should have any expectations of what God should do for me. I think most struggles with faith come when we think things going wrong, either with our lives or with the world. And we say, where is God? How could God allow this to happen? And I don't think I ever really felt that way, because I always felt that God was above it all. He's sort of above the fray in a way. And, that he created a world in which we all exist, and he created a world with certain rules. And we sort of do what we want with the world for the most part, except those rare times when God steps in. And our job as we travel through life is to try to make the world as good a place as we can, beginning with our own immediate circle and then hopefully radiating outward into the world. So I don't think I ever really lost faith. I don't blame God if someone I love gets sick or dies. I don't say, God, how could you allow this to happen if I get into a car accident or something like that? Or if I get sick, if I get a disease, if I have to have surgery or something like that. I don't blame God. And but I do look to God for comfort in those troubling times. That may be a bit of a rarity, I know, because most people look to God. You ask for something and then you either get it or you don't. And if you do, God answered your prayers. And if you don't, God didn't answer your prayers. But I don't really look at the world that way. And I think a lot of people are sort of the same as I am in that sense, in that we don't expect God to be like waiting around for us to ask for things and then there to provide it for us. So that's my story. And I'm sticking to it.
Rabbi Schwartz, what about you?
So just one of the things Cantor said brought to my mind, he said that, faith in God, not necessarily that God will do this or do that or not do this or do that, but just faith, belief in God. And it's interesting that the first of the 10 commandments is a sort of that. It's been understood as that, as the tradition has unpacked that text over, long time at this point. Anochi Adonai Elohecha asher hotzeiticha me'eretz Mitzrayim. How's that a commandment? But it's really been understood as believe in God. So I remember. I don't think I've ever. I don't know if I've ever told anyone this actually, but when I was probably like, 8, 9, 10-ish, 11-ish maybe. I had this sort of ritual that I would do before I went to sleep at night, which was to sort of very fervently pray in bed. I was already be in bed, and not like a long thing, but maybe like 3 or 4 minutes, and like the typical prayers that you would expect from a kid. I would say like, please take care of my parents and my sister and my brother, and like those kinds of things. But it was like a very intense ritual for me that I did for I think at least a couple of years. And then so anyway, that would sort of be, I guess, an early experience for me in my life in terms of trying to figure out what faith meant and how some of the dynamics work in terms of prayer and what that's all about and those kinds of things. And of course, getting back also to what Cantor was saying, I don't know, I shouldn't say that, but one, or at least for me, you get to a point where maybe you begin to realize that's not necessarily what faith has to be about. It's not about necessarily requesting X, Y, or Z, and then either receiving it or not receiving it, and determining from that experience whether God cares about you or doesn't care about you. That faith for me has become over the years actually very connected to prayer and my understanding of prayer, but it's a powerful internal experience, that you're looking inward to understand more about yourself. And then I think also for me, the outward request is also getting back to Cantor, this sense of asking for courage and strength and hope. Those kinds of things that we know are inside of us, but we sometimes can't locate. And God maybe is a source that enables us to locate those things that we have already, and to help us find them and then use them in the best way to make our lives better, lives of our family, and maybe even make the world a little bit better.
Yeah, that's, I agree, because I also very connected to prayer, my faith. And my favorite prayers aren't bakashot, they're not requests, they're prayers of shalach, of praise and gratitude, are some of my favorite prayers, not, asking for and then receiving. And it's an interesting sort of thing on how prayer works for our tradition. Rabbi Shalva, how about you?
Well, I had this sense early on that for me, faith was going to be found when I could get out from under the Jewish tribal tent. I needed especially as a teen and as a young adult, I had to get out. I think I don't know if that was, or actually I do know that was a lot about my personality. But I needed to find out what was God when it wasn't in the synagogue, when it wasn't through a prayer book, when it wasn't contextualized even by the Torah. The way that I actually ended up arriving at faith was actually in Zen meditation centers. Because those for me were the most sort of pared down, kind of like in some ways culturally neutral turf, if you will, at least for me. I always went into Zen meditation in my teen and early 20s with a sense of being a Jew. But I just wanted to find God on my own terms, if you will, which perhaps is a little bit, it's a little bit of chutzpah, but I've been accused of that from time to time. What I found was at a really powerful point in one meditation retreat. I found myself. This was in a Buddhist monastery in Rhode Island, of all places, rural Rhode Island. I found myself saying the Shema. I had never had a practice of saying the Shema. It wasn't something that it was something I knew, of course, having gone to, you know, religious school and bar mitzvah and things like that. But there was no prompting. There was no sense of it being an obligation in any way, but it came from the deepest part of me. And it was that prayer, sort of without the context of my Jewish life, that drew me back into Judaism. And sort of, and I for me, that will also, I think, always be faith, is where is the place where the kind of the most intimate internal part of ourselves, when it speaks, what does it say? And I found, I mean, interestingly enough, I found that the Shema was as intimate and personal and authentic a place as I know, which was a surprise at the time, but a wonderful one.
How old were you then?
Yeah, I would just graduated college, so I guess, you know, 23, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
And when you say the Shema and the V'ahavta, or was just like the Shema?
It was just the Shema, and it was almost like a little bit of like a mantra, like I was saying it over and over again. It was just, and honestly, there was a part of my mind that was a little bit like, why is this happening? Like a little bit like, this is so interesting. But I found the other thing I would say, whether this is to the topic or not, of faith, is as I began to say that prayer, and it almost became like this mantra in my meditation, I found myself feeling much more grounded and calm, and in a kind of just a more centered, I felt more at peace. Another surprise.
Would you say that was an experience that was important in terms of leading you towards rabbinical school?
100%. Yeah, it sort of propelled me in that direction. I wouldn't have described myself as a person of faith before that, and I certainly wouldn't have described myself as rabbinically bound in that way. But after that experience, you know, when you have something like that where you're, and in these meditation retreats, and there's a lot of different spiritual paths that we have in Judaism that can bring us to moments of, really, I think like our Yom Kippur fast can sometimes be that, where it really brings us to the edge, and we kind of see in a way what we're made of and what's deep in our hearts. You know, I love fast days because of that too. But when something like that comes up, I found that it was almost a little bit like, what choice did I have? Of course, you know, I had to at least explore it more. And that was kind of the next step that then led to eventually to rabbinical school, and then, you know, to this great adventure.
I love your relationship of it to the Yom Kippur fast, because I think that's very, very indicative of what faith can do for us. If we wanted to go back to the Maccabees, you know, when you're doing the Yom Kippur fast, you reach within yourself for those reserves of strength that you think you can't go on without eating or drinking. You reach within yourself for those reserves of strength. And I think that part of faith is being able to do that your faith gives you the strength to reach within yourself and do what you might think you couldn't do.
It's interesting that you say that. Do you think that faith is sort of an innate thing that everybody possesses, or do you think that it's something that somebody can gain through life experiences?
That is a really interesting question. Rabbi Shalva, are you about to say something?
Well, I was just going to say that my wife Sarah always has this joke that she says some people are born with the God chip. You know, that they've got some kind of, you know, they on their circuit board, there's this chip, right? And it makes them, or another way to see it is like they have an antenna where they can just tune into the God frequency. I think that's true. I think that is true. However, I do think that experiences can change us, you know, and a classic one would be like a near-death experience. Suddenly someone who didn't have even a sense of God's presence in any ways suddenly is moved to connect to faith after something like that. But I do think some people just are kind of naturally inclined that way.
And maybe, you know, maybe the opposite is true also. I'm thinking of, there's a movie, Ben, I bet you'll know the name of it. It's about two Holocaust survivors who moved to the same town, I think in Canada, not realizing they've moved to the same town. The Quarrel, that's it.
Yeah.
That's it. And one of them becomes a chassid, like a black hat wearing, very traditional Jew. And the other one totally, you know, leaves his faith behind. And it's a series of conversations between them. I think I saw it meant probably 20 plus years ago. Yeah. So that's kind of the same experience that they shared. And that experience drove one of them deeper into faith and one of them away from faith. Yeah.
And probably each of them sort of felt sorry for the other.
They did. Yeah. You know, that's like the conversation circled around that, you know, like, how could you, you know, it was like that kind of thing.
And an interesting note of that, which I actually think is related to what we're talking about too, is the one that did not go towards traditional Judaism, but became kind of secular in that play. He became a poet. He was he became an author, and he was actually in the town because he was giving like a book talk or something.
Okay. Yeah.
And I think that there's also an interesting thing where sometimes people might have the godship, but they wouldn't call it that. Like artists, I think sometimes you would ask them if they connect with faith, maybe not, but when you actually look at the act of what they do in their creative spirit, it's so filled with emunah, with faith.
So do you think that do you think everybody has a godship, but then some people then aren't connected to it? Or is it possible to connect to it, you know, later? Or is it, you either have it and you can connect to it, or you don't have it at all? And I'm intrigued by this idea.
Yeah, I'm not sure I would say that it's something that's hardwired. You know, I think it's in some ways, so it's like the nature nurture question, I guess. But I think that, you know, faith is something you can grow into. I think many people are sort of naturally interested in faith. You know, maybe that's a hardwired piece of being human, interested in mystery, and trying to understand mystery in the universe. But I think you can grow into faith, and you know, through practice, through spiritual discipline, through study, through ritual. So I don't know if I would say faith per se is hardwired in that way. I don't know.
Certainly the chip, I think, needs to be activated. If you look in the Torah, look at Abraham. Mm-hmm. God said, Abraham, didn't know who God was. And Moses, till he saw the bird, he doesn't talk much about God until he meets him face to face, the burning bush. So, you know, I think that the chip is there, but there needs to be something to activate it for some people. Some it's a bigger thing than others, and some it could just be the experiences of life that activate it.
Okay, so sort of shifting gears a little bit, but sort of on the same, you know, kind of wavelength, I think. You know, I meet a lot of people that are sort of what that describe themselves as being Jewish, but, you know, I'm not really religious. You know, I went to Hebrew school, but I hated it. Like, I don't understand all the rules, and there's so much things to do, and it doesn't really like mean anything to me. Is it possible to live this sort of like fully, you know, meaningful Jewish life without, you know, doing all of the mitzvahs that, you know, are in the Torah? Or like, is the reverse, you know, a thing that sort of happens too, right? Can you be a person who observes, you know, mitzvot, you know, does what they're supposed to do, davens 3 times a day, but it's still like a bad person? Like, is that like kosher? Like, is God going to reward a wicked person who still obeys all of these mitzvot? Like, what do you think? Does faith play like into how does faith sort of play into, you know, the idea of mitzvot into our lives, and how does like kavanah play into that?
Well, it's sort of like, I think you're talking about probably people, because if you truly obey all the mitzvot, you're not going to be a bad person. Because you sort of have to be a good person if you're obeying all the mitzvot to the letter. It would be very hard to be a bad person if you're obeying all those mitzvot. Most people, I think, are a little more selective about the mitzvot. A lot of people who are observant adhere more to the outward physical physical trappings of the mitzvot, and not to the inward the mitzvot about how you're supposed to, behave more or less toward other people. And we see that in all religions. There are people who are outwardly religious and they wear their belief in God on their sleeve, but in private or in their own minds, they're not particularly good people. They don't, they might struggle with it, and they might ask God to make them better people, but on the whole, they don't behave all that well. And there are plenty of people who aren't religious, don't follow any of the mitzvot, who behave like perfectly wonderful people all the time. So it's I would say it's those things, the outward trappings are sort of add-ons. You know what I mean? If you start from being a basically righteous, righteous as far as being, sort of intrinsically obeying those rules that all people basically know to be the right thing to do, but we don't always achieve them. Obeying those things, and then you add the outward rituals to sort of remind yourself of those things. It's hard to rob a bank while you're wearing tefillin. It's.
I should know. I've tried, and it's very. It didn't work out well. No, so to me, it's a little bit like the forest and the trees issue, and the trees are the mitzvot, but the purpose of the whole forest is the core of the question. I mean, that's really what you're concerned about, I think you certainly can find people who are observant of the commandments, but in a very punctilious way, but pretty nasty people. I mean, look at the Isaiah text from Yom Kippur morning, which is making precisely that point. Well, so it's very nice if you do all the stuff, but hey, if you're, rotten to the core, then what's the point, really? I think it's I can't remember if it's from the Gemara or the Midrash. I think it's a Midrashic text. And the rabbis get into this interesting conversation about, sort of what's the purpose of the mitzvot. I think it's actually around the shechting of a fish. Like, does a fish need to be shechted? And one guy says, that's a nudnik question. And then somebody kind of pipes up and says, that's not really the point. The point of the mitzvot is litzarefa ta adam, which is like to refine, like that word is to refine metal, to get the good metal from the bad metal. And that sense of refining a human being, refining a person, a personality, a character, through that structure of the commandments, to me is what makes the most sense.
I really see the essence of faith is a relationship, and every relationship needs some kind of structure to support it. Even if it's like I'm married, so I have a wedding ring. That's like a very simple sign that sort of helps me focus on that relationship and make it special. So and in a relationship, let's say with a friend or a family member, I call them at a sort of regular basis to sort of put energy into the relationship. There's a lot of things that we do to keep relationships alive that have to do with taking them out of just sentiment alone. Saying you love someone is great, but like, what do you do with that? That's kind of where I think that's so important. So for me, the mitzvot are that. There's like it's like, okay, I have this love, I have this connection, we have this relationship, but what's our like action plan? What are we gonna do? And so, but I do think that can imply that there can be variety. I don't actually think it has to be a one size fits all. I mean, we know that already with just the way Jewish communities differ in how they took mitzvot. When the Jews of Spain took it this way and the Jews of Eastern Europe took it that way. And you know, and then the Jews of America in 20th century take it this way, or 21st century. So I think that the relationship's evolving, and obviously individuals can take it different places, but ultimately, you know, there's a lot of these mitzvot keep things moving and active, where otherwise what we see, I think a lot of sentimental faith, you know, which you know, in the end of the day, doesn't really, I mean, it's one thing to say that you have faith. It's another thing to show up at a mourner's home and help them make a minyan for Shiva, you know. And I sort of feel like I can have faith all alone in my bedroom and watch Netflix, but that's not, you know, but that's, again, it's all sentiment. It's just feeling, where like, how do we make it work? I feel like the mitzvot are just very helpful for that.
In fact, maybe it's easier to have faith sitting in your room watching Netflix, you know.
That's what we call Netflix and chilled.
Right, right. No, but you know, I mean, there's that great midrashic text about Abraham seeing the palace, you know, and that's a moment that calls him to his faith. But the word in the midrash can be the palace is either filled with light or it's burning, you know. And so you can understand it that he saw God in the beauty of the world, or he saw God in the world burning down, you know. And those are two different calls to faith, and both can, not that they're mutually exclusive. I mean, I think both should be components of faith, but being called by the trouble in the world is also a very compelling reason to come into a place of faith. I also love what you said, Rabbi Shalva, about the action plan. And you know what Cantor reminded me of? Remember a number of years ago on Slichot, and we played that. There's a great short film. Ben, I don't know if you saw this. It was about you remember that?
Yep.
Rabbi Shalva, if you haven't seen this, it's probably 25 minutes long, something like that. And the plot basically is that there's a guy and he's fallen out of love with his wife, and he wants to try to basically like figure out how to get divorced from her, get rid of her. And long story short, a Rebbe, he goes to a Rebbe, and the Rebbe tricks him in to acting towards his wife as if he loves her. And as he acts, and as he continues to act towards his wife as if he loves her, lo and behold, via hafta, you know, like he actually does love her in the end. Remember that, Tom? That's
a great movie.
It is.
Somebody relatively famous in it. I can't remember who.
Until you got to that part about the end there, I thought you were describing Hester Street, a movie. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
Yes,
I really care for.
Yeah, I do know Hester Street. No, this is a short. It's 20-25 minutes long. It's very well done though.
It is,
and it made for a great slichot discussion, because it is about that action plan. Like, how do you set that up? And how can what you do? I mean, it's that whole idea of Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, you know, what you do, will that lead you into faith ultimately?
So that's kind of an interesting sort of way for us to segue into our next sort of thought here, because you had just mentioned also about like responding to the call, you know, and you all are religious leaders of our congregation. And, you know, you read so often in Tanakh of, you know, the prophet who is called by God, but then the prophet like doesn't want to have anything to do with it. You know, like Jonah runs away, Moses tries to get out of it so many times, and, you know, doubtful of their own abilities. And, you know, we're seeing within them, you know, this idea of struggling, you know, and Rabbi Schwartz mentioned earlier about struggling with faith. And I guess I'm sort of wondering, as faith evolves over time, which I think we all agree that it does, right? Faith can evolve. Has that sort of played into your own experiences in regards to whether or not you've struggled personally with the faith, or how it's evolved over time?
I'm not sure I totally follow you, Ben.
So can you give an example of how your personal faith has evolved over time, and maybe if you've wrestled with it, how did you wrestle with your faith, and how did you resolve that issue? Okay.
So, you know, I think a kind of central faith question that many people struggle with in one way or another, whether they call it this or not, is the question of hashgachat pratit, and which means, it is God watching individual X, Y, or Z, and sort of saying, today this will happen to this person, this will not happen to them, this will, that's a very powerful idea religiously, and some people believe very deeply in that idea. I'm not sure I ever really did believe in it fully. Maybe I did at one point, but it's something that I have sort of almost kind of consciously come to not believe in. I would say over the last 20 years or so, and why that is, we can explore that if you want to. I'm not sure this is really the forum for it, but that would be a kind of faith shift maybe, or a change over time in faith and belief in my own life and my own understanding in terms of theology.
So you don't believe in hashgacha pratis?
I do not. That's correct. Yeah, I do not. Yeah. Yeah.
Cantor, Rabbi Shalva?
I've definitely felt like my faith has changed a lot, and I described earlier when I was, in my 20s, kind of the developing faith. And I felt like one very powerful moment for me was, I think being out in a combination of working in the rabbinate for some years, combined with having children and having a family, and kind of moving through my 30s and then into my 40s, I found my relationship to the mitzvot and halakha and the kind of the idea that God communicates to us through the wisdom of the sages. I felt like when I was in rabbinical school, I was like 100%, the sages of the Talmud were cued into to God. And so I just, my job is to just follow what they say, and I'm going to be set, I'm on the path. I think something just for me, the maturation process made that just way more gray and less black and white. So I started to say, you know what? I think the sages of the Talmud were men, and a few women, but mostly men for the Talmud. And that they were fallible human beings. And they're not, I don't need to see them as God-like figures, but more as wise individuals that I can learn from and take what works and not take what doesn't. And for me, that was a change of faith, because I really first saw them as almost an extension of God. And now, and now I see them as fellow human beings wrestling with faith like we all do.
I think also, you'll probably agree with me, that becoming a parent has a lot to do with, can sort of coalesce everything in your mind in a way. It sort of clarifies things for you. When you have children, it becomes that you want something to pass along to them, and you not only do you want to pass it along to them, but you want them to feel the same way about it that you do. And so you add that little extra something. And I think that gives you a purpose in some way, as you said, to clarify in your mind what religion means to you and the part that it plays in your life. And whether that has to do with performing certain rituals, doing mitzvot, kissing the mezuzah, something like that, those sort of things, especially when you have kids, because it's through teaching children, I think, in a lot of ways, which we've all done. By teaching children, you sort of understand, you get back down to the basics of what Judaism is about. Really, the basic tenets of Judaism are simple. simple enough for a child to understand.
So that's great that you just said that, because I think, we've been talking about, our individual, how faith, affects us as individuals and how we see it. But it's really, Judaism, I think, places a heavy emphasis on Lador Vador, from generation to generation. And faith, passing down that faith to other generations is so important to the continuity of the Jewish people. And, we live in a kind of scary world now, and sometimes the future looks always a little bleak. I guess the question, our sort of wrap up question, and why it wasn't, do you believe in God, right? Because we sort of realized that's not, a real question, because if people answer, yes or no to that question, then that sort of like ends the question, right? It doesn't allow people to go on a journey. And so how would you, or do you regularly, as Jewish leaders, I assume you regularly talk to, congregants about their faith, right? And I think you all would agree that it's, necessary to do that from time to time, yes? To talk to our congregants about their faith?
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, I think so. Certainly, if they can't come into their shul and talk about that, where can they? One of the many times over the years, I've been in conversation with someone in my office, and someone's really, really struggling with faith, and maybe at one of those points, like we were talking about a little bit ago, where faith is waning and not waxing. It's at a low point. And one of the things I've said many times to them is, you should not underestimate the fact that you're sitting in a synagogue in a rabbi's office talking about this. I mean, that in and of itself says something about you, about how you feel faith is important in your life, how Judaism is important to you and what it means to you. And even if your faith right now is at a low point, it's important enough to you to be here now in this place, in this context. And I think that's powerful. I think it speaks to the fact, it's that old thing, we talk about it all the time. Someone might not have walked into a shul in 20 years. And by golly, if they need to walk into a shul for whatever reason, if they have a loss and they feel they want to say Kaddish or whatever it is, then there's the shul. They can come in, they can come to services. And so there's something powerful about that. And I think hopefully the congregation is a place where people can wrestle with those issues and try to work them out.
Do you think that in the world we live in today, where people are very, it's a selfish society we live in, it's a me first sort of culture, what do you see faith playing an important role into helping to sort of curb some of those selfish ideas? It's hard, we see it all the time. People, that, give excuses on why they can't come to shul, or why, they can't do this or that, or whatever reason, because, all of the other things that are going on in their lives. And, does faith have a role in this society?
I mean, I'd like to hear what Cantor and Rabbi Shalva have to say, but I certainly think so. I think faith provides a powerful counterpoint to a lot of the cultural norms of today, which maybe at the end of the day don't really, create a better society for everyone.
I think that when our congregants either come to shul like they used to, or they turn on their computer and they watch us in a service, they're taking themselves away in a way from those things that are intruding on peace, the things that are intruding on their lives, that may be taking them away from God. I think that religion has that power to do that. Even a once a week shot, a once a week dose of religion for a lot of people can sort of give them that springboard to go through the rest of the week and until they next go, to give them a little boost in something something higher than themselves, which I think that's what a lot of people find trouble coming into contact with, because our world has become more and more, shall we say, mundane, right? It's become more, we've become more and more involved with the world and the things of the world, the objects and the possessions and the particularly the things that are on the internet also. Our world has become very much a part of that. We're constantly bombarded with stimuli from the outside. And sometimes going to shul or something can be like going out and taking a long walk.
Yeah.
It's just a different way of maybe trying to get in touch with God's presence. And the fact that the natural world is a beautiful thing, and a lot of those other things are just so much noise.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I love this idea of faith being that which it like takes us out of mundane concern. I think that I think it allows us to explore things like mystery, wonder, awe, and possibility too. And I think actually our world is really going to become more and more desperate for possibility and just imagination, and being able to just expand our horizons, as opposed to them being closer and closer boxed in. And so I think, for me, faith gets me out under the sky at night, looking up at the stars and wondering, and just asking questions and feeling that sense of what's possible. And I think that has a real palliative effect. I think it helps us relax. It helps us breathe easier. But I actually think it's that kind of deeper. It gives us that deeper joy that I think we're seeing is hard to come by. These days, I think people are we're starving for that kind of that joy, and I think faith still can be an avenue to that.
No, for sure, I agree, and I think you touched on some really lovely, themes there about the idea of wonder, but also hope. And I think Hanukkah, of all our holidays, is really one that I think is the most accessible to the idea of hope. When we light that Hanukkah, you see those lights in the window, and I'm reminded of God's light in our life, especially in the darkest time of the year. That faith does provide that hope for people. And I think it's it's really very important to have that, something to hold on to. And I think Hanukkah does that for a lot of people. I think that's one of the reasons why people love Hanukkah so much. Me also, the food. But I want to thank you all for joining me this evening for this discussion. Very much appreciate your being here and your insights for our community and for me personally. And I wanted to wish everybody who is watching a Chag Chanukah Sameach. May the lights of Hanukkah bring light into your world. And as George Michael says, gotta have faith. Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach, everyone.
Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.
Thanks, Ben. Good stuff. Well done.
Ben, that was fun.